One California mansion sold for $100 million, rewriting the record books for private homes in the United States. Silicon Valley's founders and executives have spent 3 decades turning fortunes built on code into acres of stone, timber, and imported marble across the hills of Palo Alto, Woodside, and Atherton. Some estates were engineered with zen gardens, wine caves, and hidden underground levels, while at least one was bought only to be torn down entirely on a single owner's decision. These are the 13 Silicon Valley mansions so over-engineered that even billionaires call them insane. Ellison Estate. This 23-acre Woodside compound took nearly a decade to complete under Paul Disco, an ordained Zen priest and master of traditional Japanese carpentry. The finished estate recreates a 16th-century Momoyama period imperial palace across 10 separate structures, linked by koi ponds, tea houses, covered wooden bridges, and a roughly 2.5-acre artificial lake with a programmable waterfall and fog machine. Larry Ellison poured roughly $200 million into the project before its 2004 completion, making it one of the most expensive private residential builds ever recorded in the country. Today, the estate stands as the clearest example of a Silicon Valley fortune rebuilt, board by board, into a working replica of a vanished century. Chateau, Loire. This 18-acre Los Altos Hills estate was designed in the early 2000s by architect William Hablinski as a limestone homage to French chateau. The 25,000-square-foot residence wraps a formal entry court on 3 sides, housing a ballroom, a library, a wine cellar, a theater, and both indoor and outdoor pools. Yuri Milner bought the finished estate in 2011 for $100 million, believed at the time the highest price ever paid for a single-family home in the country. More than a decade later, the sale is still cited as proof that Silicon Valley wealth could outbid old money at its own game. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel so you never miss one of these estates. Crescent Park Compound. This Palo Alto neighborhood property began in 2011 when Mark Zuckerberg bought his first house there, a purchase that quietly grew into a 15-year buying spree next door. 5 combined parcels now form a single-walled compound with a main residence, guest houses, gardens, a pickleball court, and a reported underground level that took roughly 8 years to complete. By 2025, Zuckerberg had spent more than $110 million acquiring at least 11 neighboring homes, drawing formal review from the city over the scale of the expansion. The result is less a house than a private neighborhood, built one property line at a time until the entire block belonged to one family. Villa Anahid. This 13,000-square-foot villa rose in Atherton, completed in 2025 under architect Mike Calesi of Beverly Hills 1. Named for the Persian goddess of water and light, the ultra-modern residence centers on an 18-foot indoor waterfall, a salt wall sauna, and an infinity pool set against glass walls. The finished estate listed in November of 2025 for $57,500,000, the highest asking price ever recorded for a home in Atherton. It stands today as proof that Silicon Valley's newest mansions no longer imitate old European palaces, they engineer entirely new ones. Tuscaloosa Estate. This Atherton mansion took shape over roughly a decade of construction, overseen by builder Ali Sadeghi. Originally intended for Zoom chief executive Eric Yuan. The finished 9-bedroom, 14-bathroom compound includes 5 kitchens, 2 panic rooms, a 14-seat theater, a glass-walled pool, a heated cabana, an orchard, and a sports court. Yuan agreed to buy the unfinished mansion in 2021, but never closed the deal, triggering a lawsuit over a $37 million construction cost before the home finally sold for $45,500,000 in 2026. Its tangled path from a dream home to a courtroom dispute makes it one of Atherton's strangest sales. If a Silicon Valley compound like this has ever caught your eye, leave a comment and let us know which one you would tour first. Andreessen Estate. This 12,200-square-foot Atherton home was built in the 1990s by developer Colin Whiteside before Mark Andreessen and Laura Arrillaga Andreessen bought it in 2007. After a 4-year renovation, the mansion ran on extensive home automation, layered through 2 kitchens and 7 fireplaces, with screens built visibly into some rooms and hidden entirely inside others. The couple listed the estate in 2024 for just over $33 million and sold it in 2025 for just over $27 million. The sale closed one of Silicon Valley's most automated addresses, a house engineered as much for software as for living. Schmidt Estate. This Atherton property began in 1990 when Eric Schmidt bought a wooded lot for $2 million, years before leading Google. Over the following decades, Schmidt and his wife spent roughly $8 million on 2 adjacent parcels, building a European-inspired main house beside a newer guest house designed by Schwanke Architecture. The finished compound grew to more than 5,200 square feet across 3.5 acres before selling in 2024 for $22,500,000. For 3 decades, it served as the primary residence of one of the executives who built modern Google, expanded one purchase at a time. Chambers Estate. This Los Altos Hills compound took shape across 3 adjoining parcels that John Chambers and his wife Elaine began buying in the mid-1990s while he ran Cisco Systems. The finished 6-acre property combined a library, a chief executive caliber office, a home theater, 3 family rooms, a pool, a spa, and a private tennis court. Chambers listed the estate for $14,800,000 after deciding to move into an even larger unfinished mansion nearby, a Palo Alto project bought from the family of Web TV co-founder Philip Goldman. The handoff traced the arc of one Silicon Valley career, from a networking startup to a compound built for a Fortune 500 chief executive. Mountain Home Ranch. This 42-acre Woodside property still contains a pre-Gold Rush adobe built by lumberman Charles Brown, decades before the land became Silicon Valley. Siebel Systems founder Tom Siebel bought the historic ranch from the family of railroad heiress Maud Schroll after her 1997 death, restoring the antique adobe and folding it into a modern working estate with new barns, riding trails, and updated infrastructure. The purchase came only years before Siebel sold Siebel Systems to Oracle for roughly $5.9 billion in 2005, a deal that funded the ranch's expansion and a later property tax appeal over its rising assessed value. Today, Mountain Home Ranch remains one of the few Silicon Valley estates that grew backward, restoring history instead of replacing it. Clos de la Tech. This Woodside vineyard estate started in 1994 when Cypress Semiconductor founder T.J. Rogers planted a single acre of Pinot Noir grapes on his own property. The vineyard grew into 3 plots worked with a custom cable-drawn tractor built for slopes too steep for ordinary equipment, monitored in part by drones and robotics alongside caves tunneled into the hillside. By the 2020s, the estate's 3 vineyards were producing only a few hundred cases of Pinot Noir a year combined, a scarcity that helped the label draw comparisons to Burgundy's most exclusive producers. The result turned a semiconductor executive's backyard into one of the most technically ambitious and least accessible wine estates in California. Mountain Meadow. This 25-acre Woodside estate was commissioned in 1927 as architect Gardner Daly's first residential project, a Tudor revival house with gardens laid out by Bruce Porter, the same designer behind nearby Filoli. Intel co-founder Gordon Moore and his wife Betty bought the estate and spent the early 1990s renovating it, adding a nearly 2,500 square foot guest house beside the original 8,900 square foot main house. After Gordon Moore's 2023 death, the family donated the property to the Peninsula Open Space Trust, which listed it in 2025 for $29,500,000 following roughly $15 million in renovation. The estate now marks the end of a personal chapter for the man whose law once predicted the pace of the entire technology industry. De Guigne Court. This 47-acre Hillsborough estate was built in 1912 for French nobleman Count Christian de Guigne. designed by architects Blues and Fevell in an Italian Renaissance style. The 16,000-square-foot main house includes an 11-car garage, a ballroom, a private reservoir, and canyon hiking trails winding through the hillside. Elon Musk bought the century-old estate in 2017 for just over $23 million and sold it in 2021 for $30 million, closing out his California real estate holdings entirely. A century after it was built for old European nobility, the estate briefly became the last Silicon Valley address of one of the industry's most famous entrepreneurs, Jackling House. This 30-room Woodside mansion was designed in the early 1900s by architect George Washington Smith in a Spanish colonial revival style for copper magnate Daniel Jackling. Steve Jobs bought the 14-bedroom estate in 1984 and lived there for part of the following decade while quietly developing plans to replace it with a smaller, minimalist home. Preservationists fought the demolition for years in court until a California ruling finally cleared the way in 2010 and the historic mansion was torn down in February of 2011, only months before Jobs died. The empty hilltop where it once stood remains one of Silicon Valley's strangest real estate stories, a fortune spent not on building a mansion, but on erasing one. From the reconstructed Japanese palace of Ellison Estate to the vacant hilltop where Jackling House once stood, these 13 properties trace the strange evolution of wealth in Silicon Valley. Some were engineered for decades to satisfy an obsession with control, technology, and privacy, while others were erased entirely because even a historic mansion could not survive one billionaire's vision. Together, they prove that in the wealthiest zip codes on Earth, money did not just build extraordinary homes, it also justified tearing the most extraordinary ones down. Ellison Estate and Jackling House sit less than 10 miles apart in the same Woodside Hills, yet they represent opposite ends of the same impulse that built modern Silicon Valley.